Emotions are not accidents of the human condition. They are messages from the depths of the unconscious, coded in the language of feeling rather than thought. Every time you are overcome by anger, envy, or resentment, something within you is trying to reveal itself. But the ego, with its desire for control and comfort, quickly deflects the discomfort outward, blaming others, rationalizing the pain, or suppressing it altogether. In doing so, you silence the very voice that seeks to make you whole. The unconscious does not speak in logic, it speaks in symbols, impulses, and emotions. To understand it, you must learn to listen to the trembling of your own heart. When you are triggered by another person, when their words or behavior ignite disproportionate anger or irritation, you are being given a mirror. That mirror reflects not the other's flaws, but the parts of yourself you have banished to the shadows. Perhaps you despise arrogance because you were taught humility at the expense of your confidence. Perhaps you are disturbed by another's freedom because you have long denied your own. The emotion, though uncomfortable, is not your enemy. It is the messenger of your inner exile. To observe your emotions without immediately reacting is to open a conversation with your soul. Journaling becomes the sacred space for this dialogue. When you sit down to write about what you felt, without censorship or justification, you create a bridge between the conscious and the unconscious. The act of writing slows the chaos of thought and emotion, giving you a chance to witness rather than drown in them. You might begin by describing a recent moment that provoked strong emotion, a confrontation, a criticism, or even an offhand remark that lingered longer than it should have. Then ask yourself, why did this affect me so deeply? What part of me felt unseen, disrespected, or afraid? Beneath every emotional reaction lies a story, often an old one. Written in the language of the past, but relived in the present. The ego believes it is rational, but emotion reveals where reason fails. You may think you are angry because someone disrespected you, but perhaps the deeper truth is that you fear insignificance. You may think you are jealous because another has something you desire, but maybe you are envious of their courage to express what you have long suppressed. These insights do not arrive through intellect alone. They are born in the vulnerability of feeling. Emotion, when examined with honesty, becomes revelation. To approach emotion in this way requires humility. Most people wish to believe they are self-aware, yet self-awareness ends the moment you reject what you feel. To say, I should not feel this way, is to place morality above truth. The unconscious does not care for moral judgment. It cares only for wholeness. It brings forth anger when boundaries are violated, sadness when loss is denied, envy when potential is projected onto others. To listen to these emotions without shame is to honor. Every human being wears a mask. It is not deceit in its origin but adaptation, a necessary compromise between the inner world and the expectations of society. This mask, which Jung called the persona, allows us to function in a collective order. It helps us speak politely, fulfill our roles, and maintain harmony. Yet with time, the mask begins to adhere to the skin. What was once a tool becomes an identity. We start to believe we are the role we play, and in doing so, we lose contact with the deeper, truer self that exists beneath it. The tragedy of modern existence is that many people die never having met themselves, only the mask that the world applauded. From childhood, we are trained to wear these masks. The obedient child becomes the agreeable adult. The gifted child becomes the performer. The wounded child becomes the helper or the pleaser. Each mask serves a purpose. It earns love, approval, and safety. But the soul cannot breathe through pretense. It suffocates beneath the weight of expectations. The moment you start journaling about who you think you must be, you begin to loosen the grip of the persona. When you ask yourself, what mask do I wear to be accepted? You are performing an act of rebellion against the false self that society helped construct. The mask has its benefits and we should not despise it. Without a persona, we could not navigate the outer world. The danger arises when the mask becomes fused with identity. You may tell yourself, I am a kind person, but your kindness might be a defense against rejection. You may see yourself as strong and composed, yet beneath that composure lies an unacknowledged fear of vulnerability. The persona hides the shadow, but in doing so, it also hides vitality. To maintain the mask, you must constantly censor your impulses, emotions, and truths. The result is psychic exhaustion, a sense of emptiness that no success or admiration can fill. Journaling offers a private arena where the mask can fall away. On the page, you are not performing. You are not being watched. You are not required to please anyone. In this sacred solitude, you can ask questions the ego avoids. What am I afraid others will see if I stop pretending? What parts of me have I sacrificed to maintain an image? These questions pierce through the facade, revealing the living person behind the performance. Sometimes the answers will be painful, for they expose the loneliness of a self that has been silenced. But it is through this pain that authenticity begins to awaken. The persona often forms around wounds of shame. If, as a child, you were criticized for being too emotional, you learned to appear calm. If you were scolded for being too loud, you learned to shrink your voice. If you were only praised when you achieved, you learned to measure your worth by performance. The mask, then, is not merely social. It is psychological armor. But armor that once protected you now confines you. To write about it is to remember the moment you first chose safety over self-expression. In this remembering, you take back power from the past. You realize that the mask was never imposed on you. It was chosen unconsciously, in order to survive. As you continue journaling, you might notice contradictions between what you show to the world and what you feel within. You may appear confident, but secretly doubt your worth. You may project compassion while harboring suppressed anger. These inconsistencies are not flaws, they are evidence that the mask is cracking. Do not rush to fix them. Observe them. Let the words reveal the gap between appearance and essence. Every sentence written in truth brings you closer to integration. The goal is not to destroy the persona, but to make it transparent, to wear it consciously rather than be worn by it. When you dare to write your unfiltered truth, the persona begins to lose its tyranny. You may find yourself writing things you have never said aloud, your envy of others, your hidden desires, your quiet fears. These confessions are not weaknesses. They are acts of liberation. They allow the true self, long buried, to breathe again. In Jungian terms, this process bridges the conscious and the unconscious, allowing light to penetrate the darkness of repression. The mask dissolves not through rejection but through awareness. Once you see it clearly, it no longer deceives you. To live without the mask is not to abandon civility or role, it is to bring authenticity into them. You still play the part, but you know it is a part. You can smile without pretending, speak without manipulation, and act without fear. Through journaling, you peel away layers of falseness until you encounter something raw, spontaneous, and alive. That is the face behind the mask, the face that was always there, waiting to be seen not by the world, but by you. Shame is among the most powerful and misunderstood emotions in the human psyche. It is the great silencer, the inner voice that tells you not to speak, not to act, not to be seen. Yet within the very energy of shame lies an immense reservoir of creative power. What you have repressed as unacceptable, improper, or dangerous is often the birthplace of your deepest potential. The unconscious does not destroy what the ego disowns, it merely hides it. When you feel shame, you are standing at the threshold of a buried treasure. To confront it through reflection and writing is to reclaim the vitality that has long been trapped in darkness. From early life, you are taught to equate acceptance with obedience. The moment you expressed something raw or instinctual, anger, curiosity, Desire, it was judged, ridiculed, or punished. The psyche, eager for belonging, learned to bury these qualities under layers of restraint. Over time, they became the shadow aspects of your personality. You appear polite, self-controlled, even virtuous, but beneath this cultivated image lies the disowned self, the passionate, impulsive, and creative being who once moved freely. Shame acts as the guardian of this exile, whispering that to retrieve it would invite rejection. Yet what the shadow conceals is not evil. It is the fullness of life itself. To explore this through journaling, you might begin by asking, what parts of myself do I find shameful? Write down the traits, desires, or memories that make you uncomfortable. Do not censor yourself. The act of naming them is the first act of liberation. You may find that the things you label as shameful, your sensitivity, your anger, your sensuality, your ambition, are not flaws but distorted strengths. They became distorted only because you were forced to suppress them. Shame binds energy. It turns life force inward, creating anxiety and self-doubt. But when that same energy is expressed consciously, it becomes creativity, power, and passion. Consider, for example, the person who feels ashamed of their anger. They may have learned as a child that expressing frustration led to punishment. To survive, they buried their anger, transforming it into compliance. But anger is not inherently destructive. It is the emotion that protects boundaries and asserts dignity. When expressed through writing, art, or honest dialogue, it becomes a force of clarity and change. Likewise, someone who feels ashamed of their sensuality may have been told that desire is immoral or dangerous. In repressing it, they cut themselves off from their vitality. When they dare to write about their longing without judgment, they discover that eros, the creative impulse, is the same energy that animates art, connection, and life itself. The process of turning shame into power is not an act of defiance but of integration. To write about shame is to hold the rejected part of yourself with compassion rather than contempt. Each sentence becomes an act of acceptance. You are saying to the shadow, I see you. You belong. As you write, notice how your body responds. Shame often lives not just in thought, but in sensation. A tightening of the chest, a sinking in the stomach, a desire to hide. Stay with these feelings. Let them speak. They are remnants of moments when you were made to feel too much or not enough. By witnessing them, you reclaim authority over your own narrative. The creative potential hidden in shame emerges only when you stop identifying with it. You are not your shame. You are the awareness that observes it. When you bring this awareness to the page, transformation begins. You might discover that the part of you once silenced by fear is the same part that longs to create, to love, to speak truth. Many artists, thinkers, and innovators have drawn their greatest work from what once humiliated them. The very wound that isolates you can become the channel through which the collective unconscious finds expression. The shame loses its power when it is spoken. What festers in secrecy heals in expression. As you write, you might feel resistance, the old fear that honesty will lead to rejection. But in solitude, there is no one to reject you. The page is a mirror that does not judge. Each word written in truth weakens the spell of shame, returning the energy it once consumed back to your creative core. Through this alchemy, the same force that once diminished you becomes the fire that illuminates your authenticity. The more courage you have to face your shame, the more vitality you reclaim, for in the end, the energy you feared was never against you. It was you, waiting to be seen and lived fully. Within each of us lives a multitude of voices, echoes of parents, teachers, religious figures, and the countless authorities who shaped our early understanding of what it means to be good, worthy, or lovable. These voices, though long detached from their original speakers, continue to direct our lives from the shadows of the psyche. They manifest as self-criticism, guilt, anxiety, and the chronic feeling that we must always do more be more, or prove ourselves. Jung understood these inner figures as autonomous complexes, fragments of the psyche that retain emotional energy and influence. When you hear yourself saying, I must not fail, or I should not feel this way, it is rarely your authentic voice. It is the internalized command of a ghost. These internalized voices are born from the primal human need for approval. As children, we depend on the love and validation of our caregivers for survival. When that love becomes conditional, based on behavior, achievement, or compliance, we learn to shape our identity around what pleases others. Over time, the external authority becomes internalized. The mother who scolded you for being too loud becomes the inner voice that shames your self-expression. The father who demanded success becomes the inner critic that tells you rest is weakness. The teacher who rewarded obedience becomes the censor of your creativity. What once kept you safe now keeps you small. To recognize these inner ghosts, journaling becomes a profound act of psychological archaeology. Begin by writing the recurring judgments you hear in your mind. You're lazy. You're selfish. You'll never succeed. Do not analyze them yet. Just write them down as they appear. Once they are on paper, ask yourself, whose voice is this? When did I first hear it? How old was I when I began to believe it? Through this process, you will often discover that the voice you've mistaken for conscience is not truly your own. It is the residue of someone else's fear, disappointment, or unfulfilled longing projected onto you. Seeing this distinction clearly is the beginning of inner freedom. The haunting power of these voices lies in their invisibility. Because they speak from within, you assume they speak truth. They have been part of your psychic landscape for so long that questioning them feels like betrayal. Yet these voices do not represent moral truth, they represent adaptation. They were formed to keep you accepted in a particular emotional ecosystem. When that environment changes, the adaptation becomes outdated. You are no longer the child who needed to obey to survive, but the echoes persist, influencing decisions, relationships, and even your capacity for joy. Journaling exposes this pattern, allowing you to replace obedience with awareness. As you write, notice which inner voices dominate your thoughts. Some may be punitive, others seductive. One may tell you to be perfect, while another whispers that you are not enough. These contradictions create inner conflict and exhaustion. You may find yourself trapped between pleasing others and honoring yourself. Jung would say you are caught in a battle between complexes, psychic fragments struggling for control. The act of writing allows you to step outside the battle and observe it. From this place of witness, you can begin to dialogue with these voices. Ask them, what are you trying to protect me from? Often, the critic's cruelty hides fear. The inner perfectionist may simply be terrified of rejection. The inner judge may long for security. When you listen with compassion, even the harshest voice softens. Through consistent journaling, these voices begin to lose their autonomy. You no longer confuse them with your true self. The inner critic becomes a perspective rather than a dictator. You start to recognize moments in daily life when these voices speak through you. When you withhold emotion to avoid judgment, when you overwork to earn worthiness, when you apologize for existing. Awareness interrupts the spell. Each time you catch yourself in these patterns and return to your journal, you reclaim a piece of your lost authority. This process is not about silencing the voices but integrating them. They are remnants of your psychological ancestry, and each carries both distortion and wisdom. The voice of discipline, for instance, may have been born from parental harshness, yet it also contains the capacity for responsibility. The voice of self-doubt may conceal humility. Integration means separating the useful from the oppressive, acknowledging the pain without clinging to it. In time, you come to realize that beneath the noise of these internalized authorities lies a quieter voice, the authentic self. It speaks not in commands but in guidance, not in shame but in clarity. You begin to sense the difference between inherited values and lived truth. The more you write, the more distinct this inner voice becomes. It has no need to prove or justify. It simply is. When you reach that awareness, the ghosts of the past no longer haunt you. They become ancestors honored but no longer obeyed. Through this transformation, you move from living under the tyranny of old voices to living in alignment with your own soul. There is no wound more subtle or more devastating than the one we inflict upon ourselves through self-betrayal. It does not happen all at once. It begins quietly in small compromises. The words we swallow to avoid conflict, the boundaries we allow to be crossed, the dreams we dismiss as impractical. Each act of self-betrayal is an abandonment of authenticity, a turning away from the inner voice that knows what we truly need. Over time, these small acts accumulate into a profound inner division. One part of us strives to please the world, while the other withers in silence, waiting to be acknowledged. This split is the origin of much human suffering, for no external betrayal can wound as deeply as the betrayal of one's own soul. Self-betrayal often masquerades as virtue. We tell ourselves we are being kind, responsible, or selfless when, in truth, we are afraid of rejection, judgment, or disapproval. The ego learns early that conformity ensures survival, so it shapes itself around the expectations of others. We learn to value peace over truth, belonging over individuality, and appearance over integrity. Yet the psyche does not forget what has been sacrificed. The parts of you that were denied do not disappear, they retreat into the unconscious, becoming resentful and restless. The shadow is often born from this exile, the collection of unlived truths and suppressed instincts that long to return to consciousness. Journaling is one of the most effective ways to recognize where self-betrayal has taken root. When you write without censorship, you create space for the silenced parts of yourself to speak. Begin by asking, when did I last say yes when I meant no? Or, where in my life am I pretending? These questions invite the unconscious to reveal its wounds. As you write, you may feel discomfort or guilt. This is the resistance of the persona, the mask that protects you from the pain of truth. Stay with it. The more honestly you write, the clearer you will see how much of your life has been built on compromise. The self-betrayal does not only occur in grand moments of decision, it happens in the smallest interactions. It happens when you downplay your feelings to keep harmony, when you take on responsibilities that drain your spirit, when you suppress your intuition because it challenges logic or authority. Each time you choose external approval over internal truth, a fracture forms within. The conscious self moves in one direction, while the unconscious self pulls in another. This psychic tension manifests as anxiety, fatigue, or a vague sense of emptiness. You feel disconnected from life because you are disconnected from yourself. To confront this through writing, do not seek to blame others. The act of self-betrayal is ultimately an internal agreement, a decision, however unconscious, to abandon your truth for safety. When you write about moments of compromise, examine the fear that guided them. Were you afraid of losing love, status, or control? Understanding the motive transforms guilt into insight. It allows compassion to replace condemnation. You begin to see that self-betrayal was never weakness, but adaptation, a strategy learned in a world that punishes authenticity. As awareness deepens, journaling becomes a dialogue between the self that betrayed and the self that was betrayed. You may write a letter to the part of you that was silenced. I'm sorry I ignored you. I'm ready to listen now. This simple act of acknowledgement begins to heal the inner division. The betrayed self does not demand perfection. It only asks to be seen and honored. When you allow its voice to emerge, you may find that beneath the resentment lies wisdom, a deeper knowing of who you truly are and what you genuinely value. Healing from self-betrayal requires courage, for it means reclaiming responsibility for your choices. It means no longer blaming circumstances or other people for the distance between who you are and who you pretend to be. Through writing, you confront not only your fears but your freedom, the freedom to choose differently. You begin to realize that loyalty to yourself does not make you selfish, it makes you whole. The integrity you restore within becomes the foundation of authentic relationships, creative expression, and spiritual peace. The journey back from self-betrayal is not about erasing the past, but integrating it. Each moment of compromise holds a lesson about your boundaries, desires, and values. When you write about these moments with honesty, you transform them from wounds into wisdom. The divided self begins to reconcile, the inner conflict quiets. You no longer live fragmented between expectation and truth. You move toward a state Jung described as individuation, the realization of the self that includes both light and shadow, both the compliant and the defiant parts of your nature. Through the courage to face your own betrayals, you return to the only relationship that truly endures, the one between you and your soul. In that reunion, the war within finally begins to end. Dreams are the most intimate and mysterious expressions of the unconscious. They are the soul's way of speaking when the conscious mind is silent. In the rational daylight of waking life, we interpret experience through logic, habit, and social filters, but in dreams, those boundaries dissolve. The unconscious communicates not in words, but in symbols, images, and emotions. Jung called this symbolic communication the language of the soul, a direct expression of the psyche's attempt to restore balance, reveal hidden truths, or call attention to what the waking ego ignores. To understand your dreams is to begin a dialogue with the deepest part of yourself, the part that knows more than your conscious mind dares to admit,